most of you guys already know my story. You guys already know my story about kind of how I was inspired to get into working out, and that it happened during the presidential physical fitness testing. I was in junior high. We got to the pull-up section. Whole class is out there. Get up, get on the bar, hang from the bar, and I can't do a freaking pull-up. And the girl next to me did like 4, and I was mortified. And I just walked away from that, going, that can't ever happen again. I need to fix this. And so pull-ups were something that I really focused on. And it was one of the very first things that taught me when I really focused on something from like a physical fitness perspective. It got markedly better over time. I could measure it, right? And it was just simply measured by, you can either do one or you can't. And then once you can, how many can you do? And then once you can do a certain number, like, can you do any cool shit with that? Like, dude, I was pulling up to the back of my neck, and I was trying to kip up over the bar.
Just letting go, clapping.
Just going to the one arm thing, trying to try the one. Yeah, I was trying to do all the cool stuff, like jump up and do jumping pull-ups and that kind of stuff. And so pull-ups were a thing for me early on. And then, I recognized the value in pull-ups in terms of what they did for me from a physique perspective, but also from a strength perspective. And as I moved out of junior high, right, and not being able to do too many pull-ups, to where when I got into high school, pull-ups were a huge part of our wrestling strength and conditioning program. And you recognize how important having solid back strength and shoulder strength really was. So we did a ton of pull-ups. Here's my point. We're getting to this pull-up thing with, I get questions all the time about, like, how do I get better at pull-ups? And because you see all over Instagram, what you see is a lot of versions of pull-ups. They seem to be coming back as a popular thing to do again. And you're seeing a lot of like gymnastics type work being done on the bar. That's really what it is. Yeah. CrossFit style, butterfly, AKA floppy pull-ups.
Muscle ups.
Yeah, and muscle ups that people are doing. Those take a high level of skill.
Kip?
Yeah, like a kipping type pull-up. Yeah, so you get your kip, but you're, again, for lack of a better term, it's like a floppy pull-up. And some people have developed a ton of skill, with this particular thing. But a lot of people aren't looking for that. They're looking to, like, I want to be able to pull my body weight up in space. I think there's a lot of value in somebody being able to do that for a lot of reasons. I want to dive into the pull-up today for just a few minutes and kind of talk about, hey, how do you get better at your pull-ups? That was my first experience with pull-ups. And I remember when I did my first one, it was huge. It was in the park. I was by myself, and I remember having this little mini celebration to myself when I did my first pull-up. It was a big emotional, like, breakthrough for me, which opened up the pathways for me to really challenge myself in a lot of other ways. What about you, CeCe? When did you do your first pull-up? When were you able to do your first pull-up?
I was probably able to do my first pull-up in 2006. And I can tell you...
How old were you then?
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to do the math.
You just had a birthday.
So, come on, I don't know.
Not like you're adding months on. It's like,
I don't know. Somebody can do the math for me.
Not that kind of Asian.
No, definitely not. That gene missed me completely. But I can tell you it was part of my journey. It was secondary to weight loss for me because I was heavy.
How heavy?
And then,
how heavy?
Well, on my 5'1" frame, I was pushing 160. So I think the highest I ever got was 159. So, and then I had gotten to a point where, I was sitting there in my chair one day and my boobs were sitting on my stomach. There was sweat underneath my boob line. And whenever I'd walk outside, I'd just start sweating and it just was gross. And then like sweat in my stomach rolls. And I remember, I taught at a university for a while. And I remember like that first week of school, they didn't have air conditioning. And I think they had me up in this attic room. I swear I thought I needed to put maxi pads underneath my armpits because I was sweating so bad. It was disgusting.
Wait a minute.
I haven't told you this?
No.
Oh my God. Yeah.
No. Hold on. So, all right. So for people listening, all right, 160 doesn't seem like that heavy. I know plenty of females that carry a really solid 160 and whatever. But for like context, and I'm just going to ask you this straight up, how much do you weigh now?
I think I'm around like 122, 125, depending on,
gotcha.
whatever.
So let's say it's like 120. All right. So we're around the 120. I'll give you the couple pounds. I'll give you the couple pounds there. 40 pounds is a big difference.
It was a huge
You said 159.
On
So
a,
just
on a 5 pound or a 5 foot frame, 5'1" frame. That's a large percentage of body weight and an uptick. So
I got tired of just like carrying all that weight around and sweating for not hardly doing much of anything.
Right. Which is not good if you're trying to do a pull-up. So going back to the sort of the journey that you were on, where in the journey did you try and where were you start trying? Where were you ultimately successful? And was it directly related to the weight that you were carrying, combination? What can you tell us?
So I always was doing a vertical pull. So whether it was a pull down or I was trying to do a pull up. And if that pull up was an assisted pull up machine or if I had a super band, I was always still trying.
Gotcha.
But I remember it was in 2006, I probably had lost, 40 pounds. And one day I went in and I was able to do like 3 pull-ups. And then it was, okay, competition's on. When can I do 3 sets of 10?
Right.
And then it was 3 sets of 15. And then it was, how many can I do, in one try?
Right.
In succession. So that's where it was for me.
So that's where I was just going back to what it drives in terms of continued behavior, right? And some of that could be construed if you went too far with it and being unhealthy. When people get into exercise and they like more is not necessarily better. But the mindset piece, so huge when somebody accomplishes that first pull-up. They're just like, well, what else can I do? Like it's like it just opened up this pathway in your mind to like, if I could do 1, then I could do 2. And if I could do 10, then why can't I do 20 and whatever. So, and I think this is a big one, particularly for females, because I've trained so many of them over in my time. Like the pull-up is one of the most intimidating things
the hardest movement
they could get into. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. But, obviously it takes a good amount of upper body strength in order to be able to do it. And if you're not really strength training for that upper body strength and power or whatever else, you're not going to be able to do a pull-up.
No, and it takes repetition. It takes practice just like anything else. So if you do it once a week, chances are you're not going to have that many, your gains aren't going to be as quick as if you were to do it multiple times a week, 2-3 times a week of practicing.
Right. So, I mean, I'm going to ask you, Jeff, but I'm going to sort of make an assumption that pull-ups were never really hard for you at any point.
That's hilarious. So you're right. They went quick, but the thing with pull-ups is like we're talking about anything, it's a skill, right? So I can get them going up very quickly once I start doing them. But if I leave them alone, I'll be right back to wherever my baseline is. And that's usually about 6 full strict without practicing.
Right.
So what I did for a while, when I was getting up to, I would start adding weight, right? And usually what I'm doing is the opposite with people. I'm adding a band, reducing the resistance so they can get through the skill, learn the skill over time, being able to reduce that resistance to their body weight. And then from there, it's kind of like a strength train, right? We're going to build up. And like CeCe said, we did one week. We're
progressively overloaded and get there,
Yeah. But never really too challenging.
Yeah, so I think that's the other side of this, right?
Harder for me today.
There's a whole part of the population that is if you can't pull up, then you suck. Right. And they've never had an issue doing pull-ups ever in their life or push-ups or sit-ups or whatever else. Typically, if you can do a pull-up, then you're probably not, if you can do pull-ups easily, you're probably not struggling with a lot of other calisthenic type movements or body weight type movements. I mean, that really is kind of the litmus of I guess, a pinnacle. When you're doing the pull-ups really proficiently, there's a lot of stuff you can probably do that's probably pretty cool. In a lot of people's minds. But you just suggested like, well, okay, so if you're not good at pull-ups, what are some of the reasons you might not be good at pull-ups? Well, one of those things, and you kind of hit it right on the head, CeCe, was just the power to weight ratio. You just simply don't have enough strength, right, to pull the body weight that you have. And I mean, if you're doing easy sort of, you're deducing things really simply, there's 2 things you could do. Increase your strength, right? That makes sense. Lose weight, don't increase strength. Or do both at the same time. And I don't think most people are focused on doing both at the same time as it relates to the pull-up. The bench press seems to always take over. The back squat always seems to be in there when we're looking at my I'm losing weight and my strength's going up. And that's being measured through pressing and squatting and maybe even deadlifting or whatever. But the pull-up tends to not be in there. And again, going back to the guys that are really good at pull-ups, once you're good at pull-ups, as long as you're working out on a regular basis, you usually stay okay at that. You could get up there and you can do 10 pull-ups, and who needs to do more than 10 pull-ups, right? Until you start maybe overloading or whatever.
Yeah.
So if you're in the bodybuilding game, once you're in it and you're fairly advanced, the pull-up starts to kind of leave the equation. Then it turns into more overloading through things like pull downs, like machine type movement or loaded type movement, particularly like single arm type stuff, and all the different, machines that exist in order to build bigger and wider back muscles. Still guys wrapping, belts around their waist and strapping plates on there and whatever, but you just don't see as much. There's a lot of work that goes into having to do that. We've talked about that with like the hip slet or the hip thrusts and whatnot. It's good, but there's a lot of effort that has to go into that. But I digress. We're just going back to how do you get better at them? So one is, change the power to weight ratio that you have, right? Or strength to weight ratio that you have. And for a lot of people, they have to be consistent enough to start to lose that weight and build that strength to ever get to that point. And then they have to want to challenge them. It has to be important for them. And I would say, like, if you asked, and I'm going to go back to the female side of this thing, if you ask most females, what exercise that intimidates them the most when they're beginning their journey, it's the one we're talking about right now. It's going to be that one. And it's not going to be fun because you're going to fail a lot before you're successful. But the failure is relative to what it is that you're doing. And Jeff, you brought up like the bands. So how do you get better? How do you minimize the failure? Or how do you progress, through the failures as efficiently and as effectively as you can so that ultimately you're being successful with your pull-ups? And let's define success as being able to pull your body weight up maybe 5 times. That would be a great goal for anybody to have.
I think one would be amazing.
Because if you're thinking about functionality, what you're jumping over a fence, you're grabbing up on something, you're pulling up.
This is why I say 5, because doing it once is great. But if you are fatigued already, you're under stress, right? You're being like the house is on fire or the car is on fire, whatever's going on, and you've got to jump up somewhere, pull your body weight up, under stress, under duress. If you could do 5, you do 1, that's questionable. Maybe the adrenaline gets you up and over the first wall, maybe not over the second wall, or up the first story, but not up to the second story or whatever. Having 5 in the tank, you're doing pretty good. You're doing pretty good. That'd be a fantastic goal. I'm not saying everybody has to set their goal at 5. I'm just saying it's a good goal. But you mentioned the assisted pull-ups, CeCe, and you specifically said the bands. So when I first got into the fitness industry, there was 2 types of assisted machines. One of those was the plate-loaded one, and I remember very specifically Body Masters made one and Life Fitness made one, and you actually kneeled on the pad, right? And it doubled as a dip, assisted dip to unassisted dip, and assisted pull-up to unassisted pull-up.
It was a good machine.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. I mean, obviously, depending on the size of your body and how big you were and whatever, it took some time to kind of get used to. But it was a decent machine, particularly if you were trying to take yourself or you needed assistance or you're trying to take yourself to failure, and still maintain or beyond failure for that matter, and still maintain really good mechanics. The other machine that was interesting, I don't know if you guys remember this. You might, CeCe. You may have never seen these. There's a machine called the Gravitron. And this thing actually had a platform that you would stand on. And the pull-up bar was obviously over you. And it had like the dip machine, it had stuff on the side where you could, or step to get up on this platform. And it had where you could support yourself with your arms. And then there was a control panel in front of you. And this thing was powered on compressed air. And so you would program in effectively how much assistance you wanted, and it would pump up the air container or canister or whatever, and then it would give you that much help while you were doing your post. But you'd be in a standing position and be able to do it. So you could do everything from, like, if you're 200 pounds, you could put 195 pounds of pressure in that thing. Pneumatic is what it was, and you'd only feel like 5 pounds. Right.
So I've never seen. Yeah,
bottom line is, so there's a couple things between the difference between the two. First off, while the Gravitron looked a little intimidating, everybody that could get their arms over their head could do a pull-up, because you wouldn't have to fiddle around with, well, is 70 pounds enough? Like, is on this particular, going back to the plate-loaded machine, is 90 pounds enough? Is 100 pounds enough? How much weight do I really need? And while you're on there, you have to get off it each time. And I don't know if you remember.
You're playing with too. Yeah, like, this one isn't enough. I got to add another.
So the Gravitron was cool, but it was constantly broken. And it had a really large footprint. But I worked for some clubs. We had one in every club, and they were there as long as they could ultimately last, and then they became obsolete. Nobody made parts for them anymore, and they kind of went away. But that was a really great way to get somebody to do a pull-up, but very expensive piece of equipment. Same with the plate-loaded one. Now we have things like bands that we can use, but there's a lot of other ways to assist in a pull-up or to graduate through the basics in order to be able to pull your body weight up. And I want to talk about that. So people listening that are having trouble with their pull-ups or want to improve their pull-ups can improve, or know somebody that they want to help improve their how many pull-ups they can do or just their pull-up strength. Because pulling your body weight up, I think, is a life skill that everybody should be able to do, and recognizing that you're probably on the clock at some point in your life, you're probably not going to be able to do that anymore. So you want to be able to delay that time as long as possible. I remember my old man, he's going to be 85 this year. Wait. No, he's going to be 83 this year.
82.
No, 83. Okay. No, he's going to be 82. You're right. God dang.
Hey, that's good, though. It went the other way. It went the other way.
82 this year. When I was a kid, dude could get on the pull-up bar and go all day, right? And that really
20s and 30s?
Yeah, 40s.
Wow.
He could do it. Always like push-ups, same. He really stayed in great shape. He was into gymnastics for a while there as a young man, and it kind of stuck with him. And he worked out. So he could always do pull-ups. But now, at 82, getting onto and off the floor, into and out of cars, chairs, things like that, he's really slowed down. But I think when I was just at a big, like, extended family event over the weekend, I look at some of those older people that are 75, or 72 and not 82. Yeah. And they're having a lot of trouble. And they did not strength train. And they still don't strength train. And I'm just kind of watching it going, my old man would not be where he's at if he hadn't done those pull-ups early in his life. And that's what I aspire to be, so that he doesn't have to depend on me or my mom to come get him up out of a chair or into the car, into the truck, or into our van. Or
I can only aspire to be like your parents, because when I think about my family and compare them to your parents, wow, like there's night and day difference.
I do the same thing.
But my aunt is the same age as your dad.
Right.
And polar opposites.
Right. Yeah, right. And I think so I think everybody can relate to that. So anybody there's people who are listening that want to try to improve their pull-up. There's people listening that know people that are trying to do that, are really struggling. And then there's other people in their life that maybe never did them and aren't ever going to be able to do a pull-up. But what we're about to talk you through right now could help them still improve strength. So everybody's going to benefit by some of the stuff we're going to talk about. All right. So let's just talk about some of the basics that we can do to around or some of the basic things that we need to know going into becoming better at your pull-ups. First off, let's just start with kind of what's working, all right? And what are some of the prime movers? And again, this might be a little elementary to some people, but it might be a little bit surprising to other people depending on how we're applying the pull-up to the person. So even if you can do pull-ups, could you be doing them better would be maybe the answer or the question. So let's just talk about kind of like the anatomy of the pull-up, right? And what we need to probably just kind of call out right from the get-go. Where do you guys want to start with that?
What's working?
Yeah. So let's start with that.
Main mover, you have the lats, right? Secondary, we have rhomboids, rear delts, teres major, minor.
Lower traps.
Mid and low trap. I mean, even the tricep lightly. I mean, there's a
biceps.
Lot. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, the biceps going in there. I hate to mention that one because I always people want to pull with their arms when they can't use their back.
Yeah, but you can't leave it out.
Oh no, it's definitely getting used. Your forearm, all the grip muscles, all the extensor flexors are getting used. I mean, it's a full body exercise skill.
Okay, so that's what I just want to leave people with. Like, it's a full body exercise. So anytime we're doing something like that, like, just go over to something that's way more complex and complicated over, and for that matter, like a clean or a snatch. Full body exercise. So anytime we have a full body exercise, there's a lot of points in the chain that we need to be aware of and how they play into doing the skill well, right? And then that also will kind of clue you into, hey, here's all the things that could kind of go wrong with that over time if you're not paying attention or aware. So, Yeah, good sort of rundown, kind of overall anatomy of what's going on. So shoulders are working very hard. We got the scaps, right, that are going through the scapula, that are going through a few different ranges of motion. I think that's important for people to understand about, what is supposed to be happening in the shoulder to do an effective or an efficient pull up and get everything working as most efficiently as possible. You want to cover that?
Yeah. The most important thing I think is making sure that you're using the muscles that support your shoulder blades. So getting your shoulder, if you think about your shoulder blades, your scapulae, plural, you want to get your scapulae to come down. So depress and retract. So think about your shoulder blades pinching together towards your spine. So you have depression, a little bit of what we call internal rotation as well. So think about your shoulder blades are a triangle. So the little angle at the bottom of your shoulder blades, think about those coming towards your spine. So we want depression, so just the whole shoulder blade coming down. We want internal rotation, so the points of your shoulder blades coming towards your spine. And then we also want retraction. So that's just the whole shoulder blade. Think about pinching your shoulder blades together. But you want to also work that synchronously with then your biceps when pulling. So, and so when you're doing that, that's going to actually include your lats and your biceps when you're pulling.
So those are big prime movers in this movement. We already know that. But then there's all the things that make that shoulder blade or those shoulder blades, those scapulae, do what they're supposed to be doing.
Your rhomboids, your lower traps.
So the muscles in the middle thoracic up in between your shoulder blades.
What CeCe's talking about is basically in a synchronicity, right? We need to move the scapula and the humerus, right? The upper arm and the scapula, in a ratio, right? And if that doesn't move in the proper ratio, then we get impingement and we start seeing when you see people that can't pull up, right?
They start overcompensating.
Exactly. And they lose the stability in the shoulders. And that's what we start to see, having impingement, bicep tendon issues.
So we call that scapulohumeral rhythm, right? So the scapula and then the upper arm bone, it's a ball and socket joint. So when they come together, for every 2 degrees of shoulder flexion, there's a degree of scapular rotation. So that's, again, the scapula coming down and together. And I would say 89 to 90% of ball and socket shoulder joint issues comes from scapular
poor rhythm,
poor scapular mechanics.
Yeah, the rhythm is not there. So if your shoulder is hurting, if your wrist is hurting, if your elbow is hurting, if your middle back is hurting during a pull up, it's likely because you don't have a connectivity there in order to be able to perform that rhythm, like was just mentioned. So I don't want to bore people too much with that, but that is the stuff that we're looking at as coaches before we're starting to improve numbers of pull-ups or, weight and adding weight or load to a pull-up. If we don't have proper mechanics, then I might need to unload that movement through the things that we'll talk about and get them to figure out how to do that a little bit better, make that connection. And sometimes there may be even a little what we call dyskinesis, the inability for them to make that connection for different reasons. Maybe there was an injury. Maybe there's just poor motor function, more motor control for various reasons. But those are all things that we're kind of looking for as coaches. So we nerd out on this stuff a little bit. Now, do you have to have all this information in order to get better at your pull-ups? Absolutely not. We just want you to be aware, because it'll make sense when we start to talk about how to improve your pull-up when we move away from the pull-up to start and we get into talking about how to be better at depressing and retracting your shoulder blades. And we don't do that necessarily through the pull-up motion. We're going to break it down into its pieces. So, I mean, we've already talked about like the assisted type stuff you could do to basically take weight off your body in order to do to start performing pull-ups. But again, if we're just reinforcing a poor movement pattern, right, and we have, more weakness that we need to address somewhere else, that might not be the best place to start. It might get you through the workout for the day, and that's fine.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing. Like you're in a group workout and they're doing pull-ups today, and you can't do you can't do multiple pull-ups. You're not going to make it through 3 sets of 10 or whatever is on the grease board or on the WOD for the day. Grab the band, get the assistance, get through there, and really focus on your mechanics while you're doing that. But if you're doing that 3 times a week, 4 times a week, or over weeks and weeks and weeks, you probably need to back up a little bit and let's address some other things in order to get to improve general strength in order to improve your mechanics to then be able to get better at pull-ups. One of the things that I really like to do right at the get-go, before we even add weight to them, is get them to feel what those movements feel like. So just getting your hands on your client and asking them to go through depression, retraction, internal rotation, external rotation, kind of watching those mechanics, see, hey, are both scapulae, are they moving together? Is one moving a little bit more? Are we seeing something jumping around there? Are we seeing some tightness or in one area versus another? What does the range of motion kind of look like in that level of control? And then we'll start slowly adding a little bit of load to them. One of the ones that I like the best is to get them like fixed to a bar, or like a TRX, and get them to practice their retraction. Sometimes they don't even have the strength to do with a little body weight. When I say fixed to a bar, like on a squat rack, like an inverted row, an inverted row, so that we can work through that scapular retraction in order to start to strengthen those muscles that aid in both depression and internal rotation, or retraction and internal rotation. So kind of get those things woken up, because that's generally where we find most of the weakness. Would you agree?
Yes. So actually, I brought the 10-year-old in last night for a workout because she wanted to work out. And so what I had her do is I actually had her go stand up to the wall, and I had her put her arms straight out in front of her where there was like an inch between the tips of her fingers and the wall. And I had her reach through her shoulder blades to try to touch the wall and then to squeeze her shoulder blades back so that she had more awareness before we went to do something like a row. So she would actually use her shoulder blades versus try to use her arms. So there's that. And then the other thing is getting somebody to do very similar, standing at the wall, putting their arms straight up over their head, and then reach for the ceiling, and then squeezing the shoulder blades down and together, and giving them the cue of think about squeezing your shoulder blades down and together towards your spine. Just to get them to be familiar with the movement pattern before I actually load somebody. Because sometimes we have some, people who aren't very in tune with their body, and to try to have them hold their body weight and get them to move their shoulder blades, that can be very intimidating.
And it's not very realistic for most people, beginners or people that are just learning how to do this. It's not a great place to start, right? It's better to start with some of these basic movement patterns so that they can feel it. And by the way, that can be exercised
in and of itself.
They can find out how really challenging it is to make that connection and move through there. A lot of people would say, well, why don't you just put them on a pull down machine? Teach them how to do the pull up there.
There's no skill involved. It's not the same. Doesn't transfer over.
Yeah. So part of it is like there's no skill. So there's some specifics there. When we're putting people on a pull down machine versus hanging them from a bar.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier all those things that are involved, and you guys were talking about all the different muscles that are involved in the pull up. Well, in the pull down, they're still involved. They're just involved in a different way. And without, again, boring people too much with this, effectively, the neural system is not communicating back and forth in that pull down. That's the one where you got the bar, you're sitting down, your legs are locked into a bench, you got this weight stack underneath your whatever, maybe you're pulling a plate loaded machine, and you go to pull. That pulling is while the pull and the mechanics look the same, the neuromuscular communication that's going on is different.
Firing, yeah. I have to say that if I have somebody that's very new and they're trying to hone in on their vertical pulling mechanics, I will sometimes put them on a lat pull down machine to get them to go through scapular elevation, external rotation to depression, internal rotation, and retraction. But then I'll quickly move them off and put them on something where they're more having to support their body weight.
Their whole body, yeah.
Because what happens when you're in a lat pull down versus when you're actually doing a pull up, that thoracolumbar fascia, that tie-in right around your glutes with where the lats are, when your hips are bent and you're seated, you're not engaging that. And so that's one of the major differences between a lat pull down and a pull up. So you've got to actually really use your glutes, and you have to use your abs when you're doing a pull up versus a pull down, because the way the pull down is situated, the leg brace is what holds you in place. And so you're turning that completely off.
Yeah. So going back to the skill, what you're teaching is mechanics, but they're not learning the skill of using their entire body in order to support themselves and to do again, the pull-up that we're ultimately trying to get to. And I think that's another thing. You might have something that's very strong up top, but is disassociated from that lower body. So when you put that person that maybe has good, solid upper body strength, they can pull down a lot. You stick them on the pull-up bar, it doesn't look good.
They're like spaghetti.
They're like spaghetti because they've trained everything in maybe in its constituent pieces rather than together. And there's a neuromuscular sort of miscommunication happening there. It's just because you haven't worked the skill. So once we've sort of trained this pattern in, so that's one way to do it. We talked about like a TRX or a suspension trainer is a good place to start, or with your like your hands fixed on a bar, like in an inverted row. Great place to start to learn how to just do the retraction movement and then move into more of a pulling movement, so that they can feel what's going on through the back side, effectively the posterior side. That stuff can't be overlooked. But eventually they're going to need to hang from a bar. So let's talk about once you get from, the beginning stages of making connection and building a little bit of strength there, getting to the bar and hanging from the bar. The first thing that I see on people's faces is when they hang from the bar for the very first time, assisted or unassisted, their eyes get big and their grip is a problem, like right off the bat. They're like, I'm going to lose my grip. Not my hands are sweating, I'm going to lose my grip. They just don't have the strength because they haven't been lifting heavy stuff in general, or the things that they have been lifting have been assisted in some way. They're using straps or whatever the case is. They're just not lifting very heavy weights. And now their body is the heaviest thing they've ever lifted. And they're hanging from the bar and their hands their hands
in the forearms.
Yeah, the grip strength is the first thing to go. Yeah, and it's
Makes sense.
Why? Because they're not conditioned, right? So being prepared for that when you get up there on the bar, that you're probably not going to be, even if you had more strength in your, let's say your back than you did in your arms, your grip's probably going to be one of the very first things to go. So doing how you set up your pull-up program to kind of work in unison so that you're not fatigued out there, and you're still getting the most for, posterior shoulder musculature. And it's not just a total forearm and grip thing, but that's usually one of the first things that I see people kind of are shocked about. So unload them, right? Unload them. And the bands are a great way to do it. So you can grab a band. Most people have done that at this point. A lot of gyms have them now. I really like that one. Again, going back to the pull down versus the pull up, the band is really easy to use. It's fairly non-intimidating. There's some things that can happen with it if you're not careful. It can come up and snap you if you're not careful. But getting into that band, like let's go like foot in the band versus knee in the band. What's the difference?
Well, your foot in the band, you're going to create more tension in the band, so it's going to give you more assistance. Whereas if you put your knee in the band, then you're not going to have create as much tension from your body weight. So, if you're getting stronger, that's a progression for you. The other thing is too, I like either one because you can still engage those glutes to help you with creating tension in the back for the pull-up. So I think the band is an excellent one. I actually prefer the band over an assisted pull-up machine where you have your knees are on the pad, just because people get lazy and they don't think about having to engage the posterior chain for the pull-up. And I mean posterior chain lower half.
The swinging aspect of it is extremely important to be able to brace your core and not be swinging back and forth. Right?
It's a really good point.
The knee for me in the band, I hate it.
I'm not a big fan either, man.
When you do a pull-up, you're long, you're tall. I want to practice the skill the way the skill it is. So if you need to change resistance on a band, guess what? There's ones that are lighter and there's ones that are heavier. I'm not a fan of the knee. I agree with you 100%. Yeah, it winds up, and then what ends up happening is they're deep in that thing, and it's either maybe it's pulling their knee back behind their hip, but it's usually the other way. They're usually in hip flexion, a high level of hip flexion with that band down low across the shin or whatever else, versus being at the knee and being more straight up and down. Exactly. So I'm with you on that one, Jeff. I prefer that one, not to do that one. But if you had to, I mean, that you could do it if you only had one band and or a heavier band, and you're trying to reduce the amount of help or assistance you're getting. So with the bands, you can start to perform multiple numbers of this to kind of, again, build endurance, build strength, build skill. Eventually,
you're going to need to get away from the band, right? And you get up there on the bar and you've been using maybe the lightest band and whatever that is for you. Most gyms, the lightest they'll go or the smallest bands they'll go is like an inch, because anything smaller than that, they just break constantly, so they don't have them. So you go to the inch band. Now, if that thing's been hanging around or you've been wrapping that thing around your foot, extending and getting that help, going from that to nothing is dramatic. And I see people get frustrated. They're like, oh my God, that band helps me that much. Yeah. The band, depending on how tall you are in the band, 50.
Well, on the,
up to 50.
On the inch, I think it's a 20 to 40 pounds.
I think it's like 20.
Yeah, 20, so you're going to get quite a bit of assistance. So the next thing to do is let's talk about eccentrics, right? And building strength through eccentrics. And that's the progression. So you've gone from a fixed bar, from a webbing or a suspension system like a TRX, right? Now you're using the bar and you've got your overhead and you're working the bar with the bands, and you've worked up to say 3 sets of 10 with the bar or with the band. One of the things we skipped is, we'll get to that here in a second. And then you've got, now I can do this with the band, but I can't do it unassisted at all. How do I continue to build strength? Now this is a mindset thing. So go into the eccentrics piece and doing like an eccentric pull-up. And we program those in a lot for our clients and our groups. And that's a tough one for people to wrap their head around if they've been pulling themselves up over the bar 10 times at a time. Now all of a sudden they can't get one. Let's walk through the eccentric pull-up and how to do that well. And when's it a good time to implement it? So eccentric pull-up being, I start at the top position. So my chin is over the bar, my chest is on the bar, my chin is over the bar, and I step off the box or the platform or whatever it is that I'm standing on in order to reach that bar in the first place. I allow myself to go all the way to the bottom in a slow, controlled fashion. Then I reach back with my feet, find that platform that I came off of, whatever that was. I stand back up. I go all the way back up to the top. I reset, and with as little rest as possible, step off that box again, slowly lower myself down into that bottom position again. Ideally, when I'm doing that, I'm going to maybe like a 3 to 4 second eccentric lowering. So it would take me 3 seconds from the time I step off that box to the time I'm at full extension and I'm now hanging from the bar. But if I haven't done these before, when I step off that box, I might find that like 2 seconds might be all I can handle. And the other thing to know about this, whenever I'm working eccentrics, you are working the body in a much different way than when you were on or with the band or doing the concentric and eccentric evenly distributed type of work. And keep in mind that at the bottom, you are getting the most assistance out of that band because the band had the most amount of stretch on it, right? Versus at the top where you had the least amount. So you're going to get to a point in that eccentric lowering where it feels like, holy shit, the bottom just dropped out of this. And then there's a point where you're going to have to stop that all on your own. When you start doing these eccentric pull-ups, you're going to be very sore. And that can be a real discourager for a lot of people. I've seen that happen. It's also something that you want to be very careful. You don't want to be jumping from doing all these banded pull-ups, to all of a sudden doing 3 sets of 10 eccentric pull-ups because you're not going to be able to lift your arms up over your head the next or for days. Likely.
A lot of damage.
So the eccentric pull-up, I mean, that's kind of my piece on that. I don't know what you might have to add to that and where you find challenges or where people can maybe pull in some, I don't know, some other little techniques or benefits to help them maybe through that process a little bit better.
You're talking about the eccentrics. Another one is jumping pull-ups that I really like to have clients do. And you're using both the eccentric, but you're also working on the concentric. So it's not just getting yourself up over the bar. You're using your legs to help you jump. And at the same time, you've got to use your arms and your back to help you with the pull.
You know how that exercise usually turns out.
I know, but you know what? It's all about having the coach coach it properly.
Yeah. No, I like that. Like she's saying, you're getting into the concentric a bit and then coming down and controlling the eccentric, the latter half of the portion. I also like just a basic bar hang, right? Hanging
That's great.
Yeah. Literally hanging for as much as you have. Working on your grip strength, obviously not letting your shoulder blades elevate towards your ears. We want to stay packed, shoulder blades down and back retracted like we were talking about, same form, just as you are about to initiate a pull-up, and then hold that position 30 seconds.
Under tension, yeah.
Under time. And I mean, if you might start with 10 seconds and you can't lift any longer, increase that over time. That's going to help with your grip strength, also shoulder health. And then again, going into the eccentrics, you can easily program them after a pull-up workout. You can be like, I'm going to do one set of eccentrics at the end of this banded pull-up workout, right? You don't have to just switch all to eccentrics and be dead, right? There's multiple ways that you can program that and start adding these different movements and types into kind of like a pull-up regime, I would say.
That's great. That's a really great point. Like one of those things is like, okay, so you build a certain amount of strength and you can do some pull-ups. And the workout calls for 3 sets of 10 pull-ups today. And you can get the first set of 10, right? You're challenged a little bit, but you can get there. Then you get the second set of 10 and you maybe get 8. Great. You're still within a great strength building range, but now you're gassed, right? You're getting into the third set and you're only getting 2, 3, maybe 4 pull-ups. Add the band back in or add your eccentrics in at that point and progress through until you can get your 3 sets.
That, or, have your band right there, like you just said. So, and then if you need to, cluster set it. So if you only get 8, then even if you're using the band, if you only get 8, then give yourself a 10-second break and then do another one. If you can do 2 at a time, great. But if you can't, then do 1 at a time, then give yourself another 10-second break and then do that 10th one and then rest.
Yeah, cluster sets are not something we've talked a lot about here. I think they provide a huge amount of value. We do prescribe those quite often. They're in some of our programming, particularly like our Max programming, RDF Max program. That, what you just said, is extremely important. Don't just give up, right? And don't think that because you had to stop, take a few minutes, or take a few seconds and jump back in. It's not a few minutes, it's a few seconds, right? And jump back in and finish it up. You're still getting the same volume of work done. It's just over a little bit longer period. And sometimes you can get more volume of work done in that same workout with those cluster sets. So that's another really great example.
And the body doesn't know that you've taken a rest if you do it properly.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
If you're true to your time, right?
10 seconds, you're really true to that. The body does not know. And it still stays under that time under tension.
Correct. Right? So going back to the volume and the intensity is there. You could potentially maybe crank out 3, 4 more with a 10-second rest and think about that as that adds to total volume over time as you're building strength. All great ways to improve your pull-ups. And I want to just go back real quick to the hang thing. Even if you're very good at pull-ups already, you want to improve your pull-ups, practice the bar hang. For those guys, those people that can get up there and crank out 10, 15 pull-ups, no problem. Next time, for shits and giggles, jump up on that bar when you go in there and try and hang for a minute.
Because that is the standard.
And see what that feels like.
It's hard.
It is. It's not easy.
We should do it. We should have a competition.
No, it's a firefighter standard. It's a minute hang. I've seen a lot of people fail.
Right.
Lots.
It's harder than you think, but it goes back to what you're saying before. It's not how many pull-ups you can do. It's how strong is your body from tip to tail, right? Like, and that pull-up is one of those full body skilled movements that involves a lot of different muscles. It's grip strength, it's forearm strength, it's shoulder strength, it's endurance. There's a lot of things that go into it. I think it's a really good point.
There's that, but then, if you want to get a little nerdier too, it's also about muscle attachment as far as, where they attach on the bones. And then the other thing, as far as you mentioned at the beginning, women and men, center of gravity.
Yep.
So I kind of wonder, maybe that's part of the reason why so many women have a challenge with pull-ups more so than maybe men. I don't know.
Yeah, well, men are more top-heavy. You're saying men being more top-heavy and women being more bottom-heavy in general, right?
Just have more muscle up top.
There's probably several factors there. Yeah. But I think, just going back to the beginning, if you want to get better at your pull-ups, there's a process for doing this. And just jumping up on the bar and flailing yourself up with kips and momentum in order to get up there, well, that might fulfill a certain training modality for whatever that you might be involved in. If you want to build strength, right, long-term strength, and you want to do it in a way where you could do both, right? Build that strength, build that proficiency, build that skill with the strict pull-ups, but also build the skill with more of the kipping style pull-ups. Let's take it back to basics. Can you retract? Can you depress? Can you internally, externally rotate under control? Do you have the endurance? Do you have the strength and the mechanics through the entire movement pattern? And is your lower body connected with your upper body in this process? Don't be intimidated by them. You don't have to be by now. Everybody's got like an assisted pull-up, type something whether it's a band or anything. And if you can't do that, then or if you don't have those, then do some eccentrics to start and get going there, and you'll see a vast increase in your strength in a very short period of time.
Also, switch your grip up. Supinated, pronated, right?
Neutral.
Yeah. So try it all.
Yeah, and that's good to make sure that you're not over stimulating anything too frequently or too often. If you're programming these things in 2 to 3 times a week into your program, at least twice, right? From what's going on with your grip, shoulder health, elbows,
right? Because we got one internally rotated, one externally rotated, right? So we want to make sure that we're hitting all those guys.
Solid point.